Hi everyone, thanks for watching. You can support our work on our website ageoftruth.tv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channels on YouTube, BitChute and Brighteon. And remember to hit the bell for notifications. And follow us on Instagram and Facebook. To be sure not to miss any of our shows, you can sign up for our newsletter on our website ageoftruth.tv.
Hey, Alandra.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, it just works fine.
Good.
That's good. And well, everything looks as perfect as the last two times, so I guess
Oh, good.
all is good. How are you doing today?
I'm well.
On this American election day?
Oh, yes, it is that.
Yeah.
Some people are very excited.
Yeah, exactly. Some people. Well, that's good. You ready for the third round?
Hello and welcome to this edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's election day in America, the 5th of November 2024, and this is part 3 of our controversial and very startling conversation with Alandra Markman, the former mind control and satanic ritual abuse survivor, and on another timeline, a Montauk Project survivor and time traveler. If you haven't seen part 1 and part 2, you must do that before watching this episode, part 3. But I can promise you it will be equally fascinating, interesting, and hair-raising. So sit back for part 3 with Alandra Markman. Good evening from Copenhagen and welcome to our viewers on Age of Truth TV. Please like our video, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell for notifications. We are back with Alandra Markman. This is part 3 of our amazing, startling and hair-raising conversation. You can see how I prepared my hair for this one again, Alandra. So joining us from Mount Shasta once again, it's so nice to see you, and good evening or good morning.
Yeah, so good to be here. Thanks for having me. Good morning, good evening.
Yes, we are an international affair here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is certainly very eye-opening, and it has been, it is a controversial, you are a controversial figure. And some people think that after having watched some of what we discussed here. And we were just left on another cliffhanger the last time because you were in, my God, where were you? You were in France. In Reims, in France, in the 1300s, because you were time traveling. And this was part of your alter ego or the past incarnation. What was his name? Max what was your name then? And you were part of the Montauk Project. We heard some of that, and we'll get into more of that. And you were part of this time travel experience and project.
So apparently they were also doing satanic ritual abuse back then, because that's the sort of situation that I walked into. And honestly, a lot of the rituals are very similar to what they do today. It's been really back to the beginnings of Western civilization, certainly. At least from what I witnessed, it seems pretty consistent. of course, they didn't have some of the technological elements that we have now. But yeah, a lot of it was sadly kind of familiar to me.
I mean, what sort of things did you see back then as a time traveler to the 1300s? I mean, that you also witnessed or experienced on this in this era, or I mean, what do you call that era? It's a different timeline, isn't it? When you
Yeah,
were
yeah,
max at the Montauk Project. Please also
yeah.
just tell people what that was, because so it's not on this timeline, on Alandra's timeline.
Well, it's complex, and even my understanding of it is not perfect. So I'll do my best, and hopefully people can bear with me. So yeah, the Montauk experience was a more literal time travel experience where you enter at one period and then you leave at another period. You go through this tunnel. As I perceived it, it was a tunnel. Um, on top of this, and maybe we'll get to this, maybe not, but there's also the separate experience of being age regressed and used in what's more commonly called the secret space program. So there's that whole aspect of things, which is another time distortion aspect. Um, but in terms of what was happening at Montauk, it's fairly linear. I mean, at least from this one perspective, it's fairly linear, where it's going back and forth across different, yeah, time periods and places. In the, with the same kind of self-reference point, with the same aging of one's personal body. Um, yeah. So,
But I mean,
uh,
we know the Montauk Project from this timeline, from our timeline, just in the
yeah,
past. It
yeah.
ended in the 80s. Some people say it
Mhm.
was definitely over by 93. But I mean, this was on this timeline. But
Yeah.
you were alive as Alandra at that time because you were born in 86.
Yeah. Yes, Max, well, Alan is the original, was the original name of this body. So, and Alondra is a name that we chose so that we could represent ourselves all together at the same time. Um, so
And you, oh, who? I mean, who? I mean, there are lots of altars there. We talked about quite a lot of them. But you do
yeah,
have a name that well, where you call yourself Alan Andre, right?
yeah, that was the birth name of this body that I'm in currently. Yeah. Hmm.
And then Alan Andre obviously could be Alandra, yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
he's
then you
part of
were
Alondra.
integrated, your past incarnation as Max, experiencing what you experienced at the Montauk Project,
Hmm.
were integrated with Alandra, Alan
Yeah.
Andre, at some
Yeah.
point, and therefore
Yeah.
you retrieved memory, and you did not go to this in between state at the point of death, this Bardo.
Not in that case, no. No, it was directly from one body to another. I also have my own past life memories, where I do go through the Bardo and it's a more normal process of reincarnation. Um, but this process did not involve the Bardo. It's just from one body to the other body, no gap in between, no awareness of the afterlife, very much in this realm, the whole time.
Done
Um,
deliberately on purpose by these perpetrators, these people at what,
quite
Montauk or in your this life experience?
well, both is the answer to that. So those dates you mentioned are significant. Yeah, most of the surface base at Montauk shut down in the 80s, and the 93 was a very pivotal moment. Um, there's a big time distortion associated with the Montauk Project, which is especially notable in years ending in three. So 1943, was the Philadelphia experiment, the Eldridge and all that. And then moving forward through time, especially every 20 years is very notable, but also every 10 years. Um, so, big ones, 63, 83, and then 2003. But so 93 was actually when Max came into this body. So, and that's not random. That's part of the Montauk time distortion, because there are certain possibilities that are enabled at certain times there. Um, so 93 was basically when most of the rest of the base, at least the surface parts of it, shut down. And also Max came into this current body. Um, And it was
You
all
would have
part of,
been like 6 or 7 at the time.
yeah, 6. Hmm.
But at that time, you had no memory of what Max experienced at Montauk.
Uh, Not much. Um, Being an unconscious slave, the memories are still in there, but you don't have conscious access to them, is the way I can say it. Yeah. So, I mean, Max did come in with all of his memories, all of these experiences I'm describing, like being in France in the 1300s. That memory came with him into this body. Although at that time, it wouldn't have been helpful for me to access that and start to try. I had no opportunity to start to process things because I was still surviving enslavement at that time. Um, so a lot of things get buried simply for survival. And that's the basic principle that all mind control relies on.
So when did you first understand or get to know, or I don't know, what was the revelation that you had had this past ex life experience and that your name was Max, born in 1970, right?
Yeah. Well, Max integrated with us as best he could at the time. Um, Alan was already a pretty complicated um, mind experience. Alan was also, both of these people were very fragmented, and had dissociative identity disorder. So they had their own alters and different internal perspectives. It was already very complicated. Um, but Max integrating with us wound up being extremely positive and helped us survive a lot of the trauma-based mind control experiences that we had after that, because we could be very creative in terms of who was in the front, as we call it, like who is experiencing the torture at any given time. We could sort of switch between us. And Max, for all of this incredible experience that I'm describing, Max had a lot less trauma than Alan did. So he wound up being a good resource for us because this body, this is a bloodline body. So the torture for this body was absolutely uninterrupted from conception, up until young adulthood. Um, so that level of compounded trauma it's just it's almost impossible to survive with your mind intact. But Max was coming in with his first 4 years basically in a relatively normal situation, not being tortured. So he had a foundation, he had a much more healthy psyche than Alan did. So his coming into this body turned out to be very stabilizing for us. Yeah.
When you say us, you talk about you as Alan or Alandra and your
Hmm.
many alters, and
Hmm.
you talk about Max, the past
Hmm.
life experience, and
Yeah.
his many alters.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot there. So I mean, the first question would be, how many alters did Alan have? How many alters did Max have?
Yeah.
And do you even know who you are yourself?
I do, thankfully. Um, so my soul is inclusive of all of these personalities that I'm naming. My higher self is all of these people together. So I do have a sense of self which unifies all of these perspectives, which is part of why I'm sane and able to speak to you, because we have that bond kind of on the soul level. And I can consider these different people as aspects of the same soul, incarnations of the same soul. Um, yeah, and that's a whole metaphysical thing to talk about, and we can go there if you're interested as well. Um,
That would be very interesting to talk about that, certainly, and also for the audience, I'm sure. So just say, like, if I would spend like a week with you, for example, would I be able to see a balanced, more normal kind of Alandra? Or would I witness a lot of changes in moods and personalities and twists and turns and sudden, behavioral or patterns that was not what I would expect.
I believe you'd have a pretty consistent experience at this point. We're pretty integrated. I'm pretty grounded as a system, so it would be consistent. Yeah.
You talk a little bit as if you were a computer or a computer program or AI or something.
Yeah. I do get that sometimes. Well, it's a complex system, and complex systems self-organize, according to certain principles, whether they're organic or artificial. So, it's just a way to have an organized mind. Yeah.
But you can't be a DID, right? Dissociative identity disorder
Mhm. Yeah,
uh, person without having gone through satanic ritual abuse
this
or
is true.
mind control programming, right?
Yeah.
So could it be, I mean, this is a question some people that will watch this would probably ask or could ask, could you be a DID but not be part of this, but just thinking you were?
Um, it seems very implausible. But of course, I invite everyone to use their discernment and figure out what's true for them. Yeah. Um, I to come up with a fiction this convoluted, um, I mean, there would have to be some overwhelming trauma at the very least. So I'm sure people are with me at least to that point. Um, um, and I'm trying to be as accurate as I can according to what I perceive and what I remember. Um, a lot of the core experiences themselves are just very outlandish for most people if they haven't experienced them or come across these sorts of stories before. Um, so I can understand people wanting to believe that there's a fiction element. Um, I'm a poet. I have a deep respect for fiction. And I love theater. I love the arts. Like I think fiction is very important for, a well-rounded human being. Um, and as I experience myself, none of this is fictional. This is very literal, everything I'm describing. So for what it's worth. Um, yeah.
But do you know if there is such a thing as a regular or more normal type of DID person?
Well, DID is very complex naturally, and it always arises from some kind of overwhelming trauma. Not necessarily ritual abuse, but I would say the majority of cases are probably ritual abuse, in terms of what creates the altars, especially when the dissociation is very structured and you're polyfragmented. So that means that your parts have parts. In that case, it's almost exclusively coming from trauma-based mind control. Um, when you survive an overwhelming trauma experience, which is less organized, less intentional, maybe it's just a single perpetrator or like it's just within a single family. The dissociation that arises is much less structured. It's less complex. Usually the parts don't have parts. So, in what I'm describing, polyfragmented dissociative identity disorder, that comes almost exclusively from mind control. Yeah.
Yes. It's just a very interesting topic, and a lot of people don't know let's say, haven't gone in depth about what it really is and how it works. If it's not part of a mind control program, MK Ultra or Project Monarch or something like that, or Satanic Ritual Abuse, which of course goes hand in hand with mind control, right? Because it's
Yeah.
used for that.
Yeah. This is true.
So a lot of people certainly don't have your stories and they just keep coming. So that's why we are doing part three, which is fascinating. And this, I was asking you about that experience in France, and we want to hear some of those time travel experiences.
Sure.
What we just covered a little bit at the very end of part two was that I was asking, what kind of clothes did you wear? And could you always find back to the tunnel? Was the Montauk chair there? Were you
Yeah.
stuck there? Did they come and
Yeah.
get you? And you talked about some of that. And I
Yeah.
mean, how did people receive a child or a person from a whole different timeline? You say sometimes you came there naked. What kind of stir did that create? I mean, what happened?
Yeah.
What happened
Um,
with that?
we touched on this a little bit, and I was saying that you know, most people are basically kind in their disposition, and there's a tendency to normalize crazy experiences. This is just universal for all people. You know, there's a tendency to, when confronted with something very unusual, very overwhelming, usually we do mental gymnastics to try to bring that thing into our existing paradigms, you know, because expanding the paradigm can be a very shattering process psychologically. So so people, you know, I'm sure I appeared very strange to many people in many times and places, but there's a strong tendency to normalize things and just to bring people into the fold. And as I mentioned, if I showed up naked, you know, I would be eventually given clothes, you know, treated as a human being.
By
Um,
whom?
by the normal French people in this case. Um, I grew up speaking French, and it was partly for this reason, so that I could interact with people. Of course, medieval French is very different, but you know, a lot of the basics are the same. So I still have that, you know, very deep. You know, sometimes if I'm like very much in a child aspect, I'll occasionally get them coming through speaking in French. And you know, that's partly from this experience. So that was part of it. So I was able to communicate with people enough to, you know, enough to get by. Um,
So take us through the technicality or the technical side of you being well positioned in that Montauk chair. And then you would go to that through that tunnel, the time tu
yeah,
a tunnel, a
yeah.
time tunnel, and then you would arrive in what way? Just manifesting? Was it like a hologram manifesting, and then you would be solid? And
Yeah.
they would put you there naked, or did you have clothes on to begin with? Or, I mean, just those kind of little things are interesting.
Sure. Yeah. Um, well, I don't know how I appeared to others, to be honest. I mean, I know what I experienced. I don't know if they saw me phasing in out of thin air. That might have happened. I mean, I just know what I experienced was basically, it just felt like normal physical movement. You know, it felt like walking physically through a tunnel and then just coming out into this other place.
You would manifest in front of people and not at a, let's say, secluded area?
I think efforts were made to have us come out in a secluded area, but they weren't always successful. They were not in complete control of what was happening. You know, the technology was very primitive in many respects. The modern iterations of the Montauk Project, of which there are many around the globe, they're much more efficient about it, and they're able to direct your spatial location with much greater accuracy. You know, back in the 70s, they really didn't know what they were doing, you know, like they were using this Zeta technology and a lot of reverse engineered stuff and trying to have all these different systems try to speak to each other, these vastly different technological systems. And the results were very erratic. So, you know, it would be pretty common that the intention would be that I come out at a certain time and place, but oh, whoops, you know, it's 30 years earlier and I'm 50 kilometers from where I was supposed to be, you know, like stuff like that, to give a simple example. Um, in more radical cases, you'd move through dimensions instead of time. And that would take you to completely different perceptual experiences, you know, because you're no longer on a third dimensional plane. Like some of the other very psychic children who dissociated easily, um, we would find it much easier to go through dimensions than to go across time. Like it was easier. It's something that's easier to do in your astral body. Penny Bradley talks about this too. You know, that like for yeah, for those of us who are more psychic, like going between dimensions is very, very natural. That's part of like that's just part of having psychic gifts. But the moving through time aspect, you had to be much more focused to do it. So we would sometimes be dissociating. My sense of it is kind of vertically when we were supposed to be dissociating horizontally. And the horizontal aspect, in my perception, would be more of moving through time. Yeah.
Be interesting if you can talk about some of these, well, dimensional shifts or traveling that you did there as well. But take us through that, let's say, ordinary, old school kind of technique. What if they would, what if you would arrive inside of a wall or against the wall of a
Yeah,
house or
these,
in a lake or something very, very unfortunate? I mean, how did they
yeah.
know where the location was or where to place you?
To be clear, these things did happen. I mean, we lost a lot of people in these ways that you describe, phasing into solid matter or someplace where you couldn't breathe, or, all sorts of things would happen, and people did die that way. The norm really was death. I mean, the surviving was quite exceptional. I mean, I was the only one. They would keep bringing in new kids. We'd have batches of like typically 30 to 50 kids that I would be in the cages with and that I would go through training with. And at the end of a couple weeks, they would all be dead except for me. I mean, people were just dying left and right. Like surviving was very much the anomaly in this case. And one of the ways we lost people was by these bad teleportations. Yeah.
Really? So there is a truth there because that's certainly something that people would, wonder about. How could you know where to go in the
Yeah. Yeah.
hundreds of years ago?
That was a problem going all the way back to the original naval ship, people getting stuck in the bulkhead and just whoops. I mean, that was death. A lot of us died that way. Yeah.
But you didn't. Why?
Well, I had a lot of assistance from sources outside of the project, particularly the Antarians. So, the Antarians are my eighth dimensional spirit friends who were in more of a witness role. They were not in a perpetrator role at Montauk. And they saved my life on many, many occasions. I basically owe my life to them. Yeah.
And they are an alien race, and that planetary system is what located in the sign of Scorpio, which we're in now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Antares is a binary star system. It's the heart of the Scorpion. There's a big red star and a small blue star. And there's a planet orbiting the smaller star, which is where a version of my higher self lives. Higher self or future self. There's a very close correlation between the future self and the higher self, for anyone who is interested in that stuff. So my future self is basically living on a small planet. The name I've gotten for it is Morderus, this little planet. And these Ontarians, I tend to perceive them as tall humanoids with dog heads, kind of like Anubis, the Egyptian god. They can also be perceived as mantids, tall insectoid beings who speak in a click language. So that's a common, also valid perception. And they can also
Supposedly
just be,
not very nice, are they?
well, the Antarian mantids are extremely benevolent. So they or we are in the service of the Divine Mother. So we are extremely benevolent. I say we because I feel like I'm one of them also on the soul level. Um,
So you are
Someday,
really an insectoid?
yeah, that's a strong aspect of my character. Yeah. I mean, obviously not in this form that's speaking to you necessarily, but yeah,
But you also said that you had reptilian DNA. I
I
mean,
did.
from
Yeah.
this experiment.
So almost everybody who went through Montauk, and especially the people that survived and then were taken into the secret space programs, almost all of us have genetic alterations. And specifically, most of us have Draco DNA as well as Zeta Reticulin DNA and various implants to make us more psychic and to do other things to change our system. So we're pretty heavily modified people. Yeah,
But you're also born in, I mean, you're a Scorpio yourself, right?
it's true. Yeah, my birthday is coming up next week. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah.
And do you even consider that to be a birthday? Because now you talk about all these people, these alters.
It's complicated. I observe a few different birthdays, to be honest, is that's what I do for myself personally. That's not very socially accepted, so generally I stick to Alan's birthday, which is this week. But Max's birthday is in September. And then we have another walk-in who from later on, and her birthday is in February. So each of those dates is basically a birthday. But for simplicity's sake, we use the one representing this body most closely. Yeah.
So when is it?
Oh, November 11th.
Oh, interesting.
Mhm.
So there's a walk-in that that is female also, a
Also,
part
yeah,
of you, a
yeah,
future version of you, or a past version, or whatever that is.
yeah. That one is more like a parallel version, I guess, is the best word for it. Um, yeah, that's a female walk-in spirit who came in. Again, there's this time fluctuation going on. She came in 2003. Um, I don't talk about her very frequently because she doesn't figure into the trauma-based mind control story very closely. That experience is more of an organic walk-in experience. I'm assuming people who watch your show are relatively familiar with walk-ins, which is basically where you just have another soul enter your body by choice, by consent, as an organic thing. So sometimes the original soul leaves the body and the new soul comes in. And sometimes the souls just live together, fuse together, and live as one person. But
Yeah, but
this is,
that's not you then. So suppose a walk-in is something invading you, unless, of course, as you say, you allow it to happen. But that's not you. It's not part of your soul. It's another force entering your body.
yeah, it can be considered that way. I mean, of course, this is all up for individual interpretation. When I use the term walk-in, for me, that implies a more consensual arrangement, a more actually, a more spiritual agreement, and not something that was forced through mind control. Um, yeah, but everybody has their own experience. Um,
So before we go back to the time travel experiences, talk about time as a concept. That's
oh,
something we experience in this three-dimensional
yeah,
existence, or the three-dimensional plane and realm that we're in.
yeah,
So time does not really exist, and time has happened. The future has happened, and the
yeah.
past has already happened, and it's all happening simultaneously, all of it, also the now, right?
This is true. Yeah, the now is the most real time. The now is where everything actually exists. Everything else is memory and plans and things that are not quite as grounded in our reality. But the present moment is always the most real moment. Um, and we touched on this a little bit in an earlier interview, so I don't necessarily need to go back there all the way. But
Yeah, but what I don't think I asked this. I don't remember if I did, certainly. But so your trauma experiences and everything you went through are happening right now.
yeah, I mean, it's true. Like when I go into the memory, I'm experiencing it from the vantage point of the present. That's just basic perception, how human perception works.
Well,
Um,
because everything is happening now, right? Because time doesn't exist. Everything is happening at the same time. Or what?
in a way, there's truth to what mainstream science says, or some mainstream science contends that the fourth dimension is time. And there is some truth to that. Like it does, considering it in that light, as another basically dimensional axis, can be very illuminating, and it can add to our model of reality greatly. Um, that's not necessarily all that the fourth dimension is, but it is, I consider that a conceptually valid way to think about it. Um, and then beyond that, in the higher dimensions, time becomes, as I was mentioning in an earlier segment, time becomes much more expansive. And there are further vectors, there are further axes, dimensional axes that exist in the higher dimensions that are basically impossible for us to conceive of. Um, but just as time may be considered the fourth dimension of our experience, when you get to higher levels, there are even greater realities that become, new axes of those higher places. Yeah, it gets very
So
abstract to talk about.
It's very abstract to talk about, but it's very important also to understand life and death and what happens to us when
This
we
is true.
die, which is the topic, obviously. Maybe you know that we've talked about a lot on this channel because
Yeah,
what is happening to us when we die,
sure.
the tunnel of
Yeah,
light,
yeah,
life review. Is it the Archons that have hijacked our memories and are forcing
mhm,
us or luring
yeah,
us to go back into another body with a wiped
yeah,
memory, having to go through practically hell in one way or the other? Not maybe
yeah,
your kind of hell, but maybe
yeah,
other ideas of what is not considered a good time, huh?
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to get into. And if you want to do a discussion more about just the organic process of death and life, I'm totally into that too. Yeah, because that's
Okay,
a
so
whole,
maybe I'm jumping ahead a bit, but I would like to touch on that because I think this is basically where this a conversation like this is taking us or could take us.
yeah,
We have, talked about your experiences and what you remember. So I will remember to get back to that topic because it's interesting also for the viewers. So
yeah,
let's go back to France or wherever you want to take us, trying to express some of these. I mean, a lot of people know from movies and from history books or whatever, if you can even believe those. I mean, the history books,
mhm,
what happened in the medieval times and all that. But that was one experience you had in the 1300s. But what
yeah,
about other timelines or other, I mean, like ancient Egypt or whatever? Where did you go to? Where did they send you back to? Or
yeah.
maybe the future?
Um, Quite a few places. A lot of them wound up being in far Eastern Europe, West Asia, um, Russia, western parts of Japan, parts of China. Um, that's those are very consistent memories that I have of going to those places. Um, before we totally leave France, I want to just mention part of the reason I was being sent there at that time, which I didn't understand at the time, but now has become more clear, um, is that there was a very intense struggle going on between different sects of Christianity at that time. And the Satanic Catholic Church was consolidating its power and fighting against these other groups, these apostate groups, who were trying to actually follow Christ more closely, some of whom were the blood relatives of Christ. And there was a huge power struggle going on. And this is historically documented. The Cathars were one of the big groups that were fighting and being purged from France at the time. So that was an integral part of why I was being sent there, because the Draco of that present day, my perpetrators of that present day, in the 70s, were very interested in influencing this power struggle between different sects of Christianity. Um, that's a little bit of context that I have now. And it's worth talking about because yeah, because it's very interrelated with kind of really the struggle for the soul of Western civilization. I mean, if that's not too grand of a term to use, but there's been this.
Well, I think talking to you, nothing is too grand or too outlandish, huh? So
Oh
just
well.
go party down.
Thanks. I appreciate that freedom. Yeah, and I appreciate everybody journeying along with us. Um, So, yeah, there's been a very, very intense struggle. There's this really exaggerated duality, which is at the heart of Western civilization. And this, yeah, gets back into some big spiritual subjects. But, we have extremely enlightened groups and we have extremely dark groups, coexisting. And to some extent, that's just universal for humanity. But Western culture in particular, that struggle is so reified, it's made so real, and the struggles between satanic sects and Christian sects in particular have been very intense, and to some extent they're still ongoing to this day. And a lot of that goes back to Atlantis. because Atlantis, before it was destroyed, was having a very intense struggle, between the light and the dark factions. And there, the Messiah energy, the Christ spirit, which I usually call Sananda. That's some people, some New Age in kind of thinking people usually use that word. I like that name. Um, Sananda kind of came to us from Orion, which was one of the previous systems to ascend. Um, and this whole Messiah narrative, not just narrative, but reality, we kind of inherited from our ancestors in the Orion system. That's part of what's playing into our exaggerated duality of today, and especially the duality of late Atlantis, in the Western world in particular, all across the world, but especially in the Western countries. We're really rehashing a lot of the karma from Atlantis. A lot of the same souls are incarnated now, and they're having a lot of the same power struggles, in their modern bodies. So. Whew, yeah, this is a lot of stuff which gets away from my like direct personal experience, but it's worth touching on. It's stuff that I feel very passionate about. And yeah, and it is good for us to have some context for this big spiritual war that we're in, that we've been in for millennia. So I think it's good to touch on. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's so important and very informative. So, in your opinion, or whatever you've been taught or told, or maybe have even seen, uh, Atlantis, there was a power struggle there, but was it on Atlantis or was it a battle between Atlantis and Lemuria?
It was primarily a civil war within Atlantis. There was also war between them. Um, but primarily, I mean, as I experienced it, and now I'm referencing some of my own past life memories. So, of course, I have my own past lives that are before any of this trauma-based mind control stuff that I went through, more ancient past lives. Um, as I perceived it, the whole war against Lemuria wasn't even necessarily an actual grudge against Lemuria. It was more of a ploy to get the Atlanteans united behind the evil forces. So they were doing it basically to consolidate their control and not necessarily to conquer Lemuria. It was more about trying to get their own society in order. Um, but yes, there was also war between Atlantis and Lemuria. Yeah.
Were both continents controlled by reptilian forces, the Draco, or was it? Some people
Mm.
say it was Lemuria, and the Atlanteans were more the Nordic type aliens. I mean, if they are aliens, I mean, I don't know if the human type, um, the human that we are today, Homo sapiens, are if those were the ones that were there, or if they were cloned or created
Yeah.
after.
Atlantis and Lemuria were very diverse societies where humans and extraterrestrials and all sorts of hybrids and chimera mingled freely and openly. So these were very diverse places. So I think it would be misleading to say that, oh, it's only one type of person here or there. There was open contact with the Star Nations. It wasn't like it is today where the Star Nations are so secret. It was common knowledge that we were star family, that our star family would visit Earth regularly, and they were very integrated into society, especially in early Atlantis and Lemuria. This was just part of the deal. Like people of radically different physiology and radically different, yeah, just appearances would be mingling together and considered to be part of the same society. Yeah.
Because these ET aliens were here on planet Earth way before we were, or what?
Um, More or less, yeah. Some of them were, yeah, some of them predate humanity. Um,
Who were here first?
um, well, that gets into a whole nother little cosmological thing because um, there are many versions of Earth. And this is not manipulation and Montauk stuff. This is just organic unfolding of evolution.
This is a multiverse, so there are many parallel dimensions, parallel versions of this Earth.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I'm also saying sequentially, they're, just in time, we're on the sixth version of Earth right now. So there have been five versions before this. Yeah. And each one is like a different evolutionary path.
Five versions,
Yeah.
and this is the sixth version.
Yeah.
How how do you know? I mean, who told you, or how were you educated to believe this?
Uh, that one I've never seen anybody else talk about. So I guess it comes just from my own soul memory. Yeah.
But you remember where you got it from?
Well, I've been on all those different versions of Earth. Um, my claims are getting more and more grandiose, but
We thought we thought we had nothing left for part three, but please.
well, it's true.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, let's go on. You've been on all six versions of Earth, huh?
I have. Yeah, I
So
have.
so which one was the most pleasant one?
Oh, well, they all have. So there's also iterative evolution. So there are improvements on the human experience and the human template with each of these versions. And so, of course, I'm inclined to say that right now is the best one, because, we have so many faculties that we didn't have on these previous iterations of Earth, that are now available to us. So our faculties are getting finer and finer, and our potential gets greater and greater, as we evolve along all these different timelines. Um,
Well,
so
the experience of being here does not exactly seem like a picnic, right? Right. I mean,
no, right now the mind control is very deep, but it will be broken. It will pass. And even this whole process of enslavement globally is part of our evolution as well. So, nothing is accidental per se. Everything is unfolding according to the genius of creator and the genius of evolution.
so
Um,
how far back are we in time? I mean, what this right now is a distant past, right? I mean, when you think in terms of the future, or is it
oh,
like going to end? Everybody's talking about the end times now. I mean, a
oh,
great reset, obviously, but are those this present day like totally in the past, ancient past, or what?
um, it can be perceived that way. Um, I I mean, I have to say, these things truly don't have a beginning or end. These things are really eternal. Evolution is eternal. And so you can draw the start and the end, anywhere that you see fit, anywhere that it's helpful to have a coherent discussion. It's helpful to draw those lines. But they're also kind of arbitrary because life just continues eternally. That's one of life's fundamental qualities.
Because we
So
know that in the last 100 years, just scientifically, what happened with the evolution, the technological evolution,
yeah,
airplanes, cars, and just
yeah,
the regular things that we know. And if you experience time travel just going back 100, 200 years and 600 years or whatever you talk about, but I
yeah.
mean that's not that far back when you look at, time. So it's almost like we haven't reached very far. We're still in this distant past, even though we are here now and we experience the so-called present.
Yeah, it can be considered that way. It's worth mentioning that our technological development right now is very, very similar to Atlantis. So, we're using different kinds of technology. Most of their technology was a lot more efficient, and based on harnessing the power of crystals mostly. We're sort of getting there now, as we understand the relationship between carbon and silicon and we have all these silicon-based technologies that we're using. It's all crystal power, crystal life force. The same principles basically were being used in Atlantis, and they had a lot of the same devices that we have now. I mean, they had flying machines and they had computerized databases of information. A lot of the things that we're basically reinventing the wheel here, because we did have all this stuff in Atlantis. We're just coming at it from a slightly different angle.
We're still stuck with oil and gas and electricity and all of that because it's part of the monetary system. That's the whole,
Yeah.
that's what they make a lot of money from because they don't want to talk about free energy, right?
This is true. Yeah, this is true. As I'm sure your viewers are aware, cars can run on water. There is all this free energy that's available. Zero point energy is a very real thing that is used regularly, in
And
the
energy
series.
in the ether, basically. I guess that's also kind of what Nikola Tesla was talking about, right?
Indeed. Yeah. Um, yeah, there's a really nice chapter on Tesla in Patricia Corey is a channeler who mostly works with Syrians. And she writes about this stuff that I'm talking about, the recycling of Atlantis into modern technology. She might be someone to have on the show that could be pretty fun if she's available. Yeah, Cori is the last name. Um,
Right.
yeah, her books are really nice, and there's a section on Tesla, and so this is not my experience, but this is from that book, that Tesla was a reincarnated negative Atlantean, and he was trying to clear some of his own personal karma by contributing free energy to our current society. Um, but unfortunately, a lot of his compatriots, negative Atlanteans, also reincarnated with him and stole a lot of it. So he wasn't able to make the impact that he was hoping to have. But
His work was totally hijacked, as we know, and
yeah,
taken by the secret factions of the government, huh?
yeah, yeah. So I don't know. That's a nice book form account that I came across of that. I don't think I have any personal experiences relating to Tesla that I know about. Um, yeah,
So you were talking about all these star systems and all of these timelines, different versions of Earth and alien beings being in Atlantis and Lemuria walking the Earth back then. But
Mhm.
what is your understanding and perception of the recent, at least in later years, a very popular belief that the Earth is flat?
Oh, yeah, that's not true. I mean, it's just very obviously not true, and so I don't have anything to say beyond that.
So a lot of people will probably be a little bit upset with you because if they really, well, those who believe that the Earth is flat, and we've had some of those speakers on here as well, trying to describe or well describing why it's flat and how it all works, which is
Mhm.
an interesting discussion as well to have. But I mean,
Yeah.
if it's not so, what is that? What's that? I mean, some people suggest that there are versions where there's a version of Earth that is flat and one that is round. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, this is kind of a stretch, but I mean, some of the people who have personal visions of these things are tapping into, you know, alternate potential alternate realities. But I mean, everything that I've experienced, like every version of Earth that I've experienced is round, and I really have no reason to pursue that further.
Right, and you also talked about being on Saturn and being on these bases in the
Yeah,
rings of Saturn,
yeah,
and you saw the conception, what I mean that the planets around too, huh? And the
mhm,
Earth, did you see the
yeah.
Earth from a distance?
I did. Yeah, we touched on this a little bit. Yeah, I did, and it looks quite round to me. Yeah.
So the NASA pictures, maybe we can't believe all of those images at all either, but that is how it looks.
Yeah, they're hiding a lot also. Um, I don't know if you've had any guests speak about this, but of course there was, NASA hid a large percentage of their pictures of Mars, like a huge percentage of them. They were like released to the public for a very short time and then completely covered up. And it's very hard to find any evidence that that even came out, but um, there are very obvious signs of past civilization as well as present habitation on Mars, which NASA has and which they don't share publicly. But they're real pictures. They're actually out there taking pictures. They're not necessarily fake pictures.
But I mean, those pictures we've seen from Mars, from NASA, they all look like something you can find in Morocco or in Iran or
Yeah,
maybe even in the desert in America, in like Nevada or something. I mean, some of those
yeah,
pictures, like the
yeah,
moon as well. I mean, some of
yeah,
those are really, you could find them on Earth, all of them basically, at least what we've seen, except the moon pictures maybe from a distance. But they also look like, that they were that whole moon landing was shot maybe in Arizona or Nevada or
yeah.
on a sound stage.
Um, well, I would like to encourage people to um, try to trust a few things. You don't have to disbelieve everything. Um, just because there is a massive conspiracy to hide information, doesn't mean that you have to question literally everything. It's okay to trust a few things.
But what can we trust and what can't we trust? I mean, this is a jungle here. Why should we believe something and not other things? And a lot of people are debunking those moon pictures there, the moon
Oh
landing
yeah.
pictures, because of the lighting and because of the shadow. And Stanley Kubrick maybe have done this. And I mean, there's a lot of people really going in depth here.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard these things. I don't have a horse in that race. So
So what is
I
your
mean,
understanding of the moon?
well, I've so I also went through the secret space program after Montauk, and I was brought to the moon. I was brought to Mars, and we touched on this a little bit, that I was brought to the base around Saturn. So I do have firsthand experiences here. And
Do tell, Alandra.
yeah. Well, so in addition to everything I've described already, I've also had age regression experiences that are more conventional secret space program kind of narratives. Um, like I'm currently reading Tony Rodriguez's book, and it's like very, very similar to large portions of my experience. So I've also had that kind of thing where people are calling it a 20 and back, where you go off to the colonies and have basically an enslavement experience, and then you're brought back to your original body. So that actually happened to this person also, like to Alandra. And that's a whole can of worms that I'm just starting to get into publicly, because my narrative is already convoluted enough. But um, but I'm starting to get to the point of speaking about that more publicly and getting more organized in how I present it. So yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, the
I
moon and Mars experiences that you say that you have had.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
what's the
So
moon like? What do you remember? What do you recall? I mean, what have you seen?
yeah.
What does it look like?
Um, well, again, the NASA pictures are partly accurate. They're real pictures. A lot of the surface does look like that. Most of the infrastructure is underground. There's not a lot above the ground, just a little bit. Um, some of the craters are formerly had big domes over them. And there was a very ancient civilization which had these domed areas on the moon. So some of the craters um, are also representing ancient sites of alien habitation. But most of the modern sites where you actually find people and other beings are underground. And then a lot of the spaces that I experienced moving through it, a lot of them have a very distinct kind of 50s, 60s vibe to them. It's almost like an airport hotel, some parts, when you're taken into the moon bases. Yeah. I mean, I haven't
So,
been there lately, but yeah.
you haven't been there lately.
No.
Oh, well, it would have been nice if you could take us for a ride and maybe bring your video camera or something.
That would
We
be
could see
so
it for
cool.
ourselves.
Yeah, I really hope. Well, as disclosure gathers momentum, maybe other people will be coming forward who have more recent experiences, and like it would be quite miraculous to have some actual current footage of that. I hope that comes out, whoever's listening.
Certainly, that would be quite something for all of us. So, I mean,
Yeah.
so you're talking about the dark side of the moon that we never see from Earth, that they all talk about with the
Yeah.
alien bases and the
Oh,
and the and the Air Force, the Air Force, whatever, and alien bases, and a hollow structure that the moon is hollow. Is that correct?
a lot of it is, I mean, there's massive underground infrastructure there. I can't verify personally if what the core is like because I don't really know. But I know there are a lot of underground bases that go down quite deep, at the very least 6 or 7 miles. So it's quite possible that there are bigger hollow spaces inside the moon.
But
But
can
yeah,
you walk on the surface and not be suffocated by the atmosphere? Or do you have to
no,
wear like spacesuits, what we saw?
no, you need some kind of suit on the moon. Yeah.
What about Mars? Everybody says you can't walk on the surface of on
Yeah,
Mars. That's what science says, but a lot of alternative researchers say that you can.
yes, you definitely can. Yes. There are indigenous people on Mars that have been there for millennia. And they've adapted physiologically to the lower oxygen in the atmosphere and the very, very harsh weather conditions. But the atmosphere is breathable. It's thin, but it's breathable. Um,
But it
historically, and
but it
again,
must be rather cold. I mean, it's not just a trip to Greenland or the North Pole, is it?
this is true. Yeah, yeah, it gets extremely cold. Yeah. So again, most of the infrastructure on Mars, like on the moon, is underground. Although there are some surface dwellings there too. Yeah. Because it is breathable air for humans. You're gonna suffer, you're gonna feel faint if you're coming from Earth and you just go directly there, and you haven't had time to adapt. There are various technologies to increase the oxygenation in your blood, so you don't need a full suit to be on the surface of Mars, but it helps if you have, oxygen tablets or something like that. Yeah, there are various technologies that have been developed for that. And sometimes, the easiest thing, obviously, is just to wear a suit. But you can survive up there. I mean, just as a normal Earth human. For I've heard about people, I mean, um, yeah, I shouldn't get too far beyond my individual experience, but I've heard about people who, indigenous people who just don't use any technology. They've adapted to the conditions and they live with them. Yeah.
What do you think a regular scientist or an astronaut would say to all of what you're saying? Because the official narrative is so completely opposite, huh?
That's true. Yeah, they would say I'm full of shit, most likely. Yeah, and I doubt they would be open to any meaningful conversation about it, So, I mean, it might be kind of fun if they were, like maybe some mainstream Mars scientists can be found who are actually open to all this stuff. Um, but I have to think that at the highest levels, they do know about these things, obviously. I'm sure Elon Musk knows about these things. Like he must have been briefed on all this stuff. Like, they're going to encounter a lot of different life forms, if and when they get to Mars with a publicly documented, craft of some kind. Like if one of Musk's rockets like takes people to Mars, they're going to encounter, mantid beings and spiders. They're going to encounter human settlements. Like this, if they're at all honest about it, this stuff is going to come out. Yeah.
Maybe they know all about it already, or maybe they are one of them themselves.
Yeah, it's quite possible.
I mean, that's what a lot of researchers in this field are saying,
It's
right?
that seems like the most likely thing. Yeah.
So, I mean, so you were having these experiences, were they part of the mind control programming at the time? Because it
Yes.
must be like really, I mean, that must be so sensational and shocking that that could be part of splitting the mind if you did experience some of that, traveling to
Yes.
those distant destinations.
Yeah, basically everybody on the moon, on Mars, is under mind control. I mean, these are open slave societies, for the most part. It's not like Earth where all this slavery is very secret and people believe that they're free. We are really free in a lot of meaningful senses here on Earth. Um, but in the colonies, in the breakaways, on Mars, on the moon, essentially everybody is openly enslaved, and everybody has these awful traumas. Yeah.
And who are the main controllers there? And are they the same that are also controlling the Earth, well, behind the scenes?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware. I've been sort of meditating on this a little bit. My memories are very fuzzy. People talk about corporations, other survivors. And most of my memories it's mostly Air Force intelligence people. It's like US military people, and it's very, very similar to what I experienced on Earth. So I would say that probably the similar parties are in control. Yeah.
And you don't think that they just took you to some place in the desert in Nevada or whatever, or to some Middle Eastern country and said, "Oh, now you're on Mars, Alandra."
Um, well, I mean, I have personally experienced the thin atmosphere and the breathing difficulties, which I would not experience in Morocco. So, there are some very obvious physical cues that would indicate it's somewhere else. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Interesting. So I don't know. I mean, we're going in all directions here, which is
Yeah,
so
yeah.
fascinating. So nothing is like not fascinating and amazing, but definitely we've moved quite a bit away from France, didn't we?
We did. Yeah. Yeah, because I started talking about Christianity and then Atlantis, and then, yeah, a lot of stuff happened.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but unless you didn't end with your France experience in the
Oh,
1300s.
no, I'm pretty content with where we left that. Yeah, I was starting to talk about experiences, like in Asia and Russia. Um, that was another place where, so there historically there was a very large civilization, in what is now the Gobi Desert. And that civilization, this was separate from Atlantis and Lemuria. I've sometimes I've seen it referred to as which is probably a good name for it. UR. It had another name that I'm still kind of fuzzy on, but I've been through there a number of times. So there was a massive civilization and the Gobi Desert was also not desertified. It was, as is the case with a lot of deserts around the planet. At one point they were verdant forests, and it was a totally different landscape. So I experienced that personally, in my Montauk time travel experiences. I went back to this civilization, this civilization, the Gobi civilization, and part of the reason, the Draco and the other negative factions are so interested in that place and that time is because, they're very, very integrated with the inner Earth societies. So, the Agarthans, are very, very tied in. The physical location on Earth, which is closest, to the Agarthan civilization, is in that location, in Eastern Europe, Western Asia. So, yeah. So there's a
Really, is
reason.
that what they refer to like as a Shangri-La?
Yeah, yeah. Shambhala, Shangri-La. Yeah. Hmm.
But Shangri-La was supposedly overground and a place on the surface, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
Shambhala is inside of the earth, hollow
yeah,
earth,
yeah.
Agatha.
So it's both. And obviously there are a great many stories that are at this point essentially mythology rather than fact. Um, but but yeah, it was both. Shambhala had an above ground and a below ground component. And this is part of what I'm talking about. This is why we would be sent to those locations, because those were the locations of the above ground aspects of Shambhala. And
And
there
they do
were,
not exist anymore, right? Though that location is what is now the Gobi Desert, you say.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the
Well,
Gobi
they still,
Desert is in Russia, and towards Asia, right?
yeah, like I'd have to look it up on a map. Um, I think parts of it are like China, Mongolia, Russia. Yeah. Um, but of course, I wasn't thinking in those terms when I was having these experiences. So it would be good for me to actually just go look at it on a map and be more specific about the countries and stuff like that. But
Hollow Earth, because that was one of my questions just later on, but now you've touched upon it and you talk
yeah,
about it.
it's very real. My Draco handlers sent me there. Again, that was part of the mission. So the inner Earth civilizations are benevolent, as I experience them. And they're working for Earth liberation. They're living in a very ascended reality already. They're not in a situation of mind control. And that infuriates the Draco. It infuriates the parties that are perpetuating mind control. And so there's this perpetual effort on the part of the controllers to try to infiltrate Shambala and, bring them into the mind control that we experience on the surface. But they're never going to succeed because the inner Earth people are already ascended. They're already living in a higher dimensional reality. So they can't be manipulated by such means. Thank goodness. They're another group that has been directly responsible for my survival. So the Antarians saved my life on many occasions, and also the Agarthans did. The inner Earth people are another reason why I'm alive today. Yeah, their help has been very, very tangible. And there was some very so sometimes we would get sent back to Shambhala, or the above ground aspect of Shambhala, and we would try to follow through with some sort of negative mission. But the vibration of these people is so high that situations would almost just magically reverse themselves, and we would constantly be finding ourselves not only, well, sometimes they would give us a token like, okay, and they were very aware of what we were going through. Again, these are extremely tuned in people. The Shambhala people they're very tuned in. So when we would go there on a Montauk mission, they would, and they're telepathic, they would know our entire backstory, like they would know why we were there. And basically they'd be like, okay, we know you're enslaved. Like, this was conscious. We know you're not here of your own free will. We have a sense of your heart. We can see who you really are. And we know that you're going to survive this and you're going to help the planet later and all this stuff. So like, they would know. And it was very affirming, actually. I mean, and it's another reason that I'm sane today is because I had these profound moments of soul recognition from the Shambalians, or whatever the demonym is. These moments of profound recognition on a spiritual level. And that started me getting tuned into who I really was and what was really happening, because they had the full picture. And it was pretty common for them to say something like, okay, we know you're here to steal this artifact or something. And they wouldn't make me fight for it. They would just give it to me. They'd be like, here, bring this back to your controllers. You can say that the mission was a success. You can say that you had a bloody battle with us if you need to. Sometimes they would give me a cover story. They knew exactly what I would need to say to my handlers in order to have them appeased and to survive the situation. So this is very, very active, very, higher level psychic collaboration between a lot of different parties going on. And a lot of the experiences I had with them were incredibly positive. Yeah.
And they must have seen immediately that you were a surface human.
I would have to go back. I wasn't able to stay there. Some of this is very emotional still, actually. I haven't touched on some of it yet, but because of course I wanted to stay there. But again, they had this higher perspective where it's like, basically, go back into the experience that you're coming from, even though it's horrible, even though you want to stay here, like, go back. It's part of your mission. It's part of your dharma, So in terms of appearance, well, they looked like you and me, really. I mean, humans. A lot of them were East Asian, kind of Mongolian features. So they looked like the people of the region, most of them. A few of them were taller, and they seemed to be more directly, like more recently from the Star Nations. And some of them maybe were just visitors. But again, it was kind of similar to what I described of Atlantis and Lemuria. They had an open society where people could come and go, where Syrians could just walk down the street. Syrians from space, not Syrians, the country. Um, where Pleiadians could just walk openly down the street. That was the nature of the society. So there were people of a lot of different appearances there. Um, yeah, in terms of what they were wearing, a lot of it, uh, I could sort of tie it in with local culture. It could still get very cold there, so they had a lot of layers, and there's a very strong relationship between those people and the normal Mongolian people, and the people who would become Native Americans, because of course they're the same people essentially walking over the land bridge from Alaska. So that part is true. I agree with mainstream science on this point. Um, yeah, so they would have those kind of features, like Inuit features, Mongolian features, for the most part. I didn't get to go inside the Earth all that much. Um, I went only a few times, and it wasn't really part of my mission to go in there because again, those places are basically inaccessible to the dark forces. Like if your vibration is not if your vi- blah. If your vibration is below a certain point, you cannot physically go to inner Earth. It's impossible. And by the way, one of the best descriptions that I've found is Sinmar, I think his name is. Do you know this guy? He's an Eastern European who writes about the inner Earth. He has his books from Sky Books. You should totally have him on the show. If I don't, is he still alive? I don't know. You have to look him up, but he has a lot of firsthand experience traveling to the inner Earth, and he writes about it accurately. Yeah.
So you think
that's
that Admiral Byrd was right about what he experienced when he accidentally flew into this opening at the North Pole, was it? Or the South
uh
Pole? I think the
South
North
Pole.
Pole,
Yeah,
actually.
South. Was it North? I thought it was South. I mean, I only know about that from reading about it as well, so I can't really comment about it too much. But yeah, I see no reason to disbelieve that. Yeah.
But what kind of beings are in there? I mean, who are, I mean, are they human?
Yeah. Yes, they're primarily human. And again, open society, many different kinds of humanoids, many different species are walking around openly. So, it's not diversity is just an accepted fact on Earth. Any part of Earth which is not under mind control, there's going to be we're a galactic way station. This place is meant to be a real melting pot. That's not just like an American catchphrase. Like that's like an intrinsic quality of the Earth. This place spiritually, like by the design of the creator, is meant to be a melting pot environment. It's meant to be a place where people and other beings of wildly different backgrounds and descriptions can mingle. It's meant to be a paradise planet that we all share, where we have visitors from all across this galaxy and beyond. That's the natural function of Earth. So any open society is going to have that very apparent. This thing where we only ever see other humans, like, and we believe we're like the only conscious beings in the universe, like that whole crap, like that is only under mind control. Like we're under very unusual circumstances here. The normal state of Earth is for everyone to be openly intermingling, like, and for beings from very far away to be visiting. Yeah. So just to normalize that, because
So
um,
why would these inner Earth beings not suddenly appear on the surface or
they
find
do.
their way out here? I mean,
Yeah, they do. They do. More often than we think. I mean, again, a lot of them look just like us. They're able to mingle with us. When they appear here, they can easily just, wear appropriate clothing that would not get a second glance from anybody on the street. They are mingling in our societies. Um, they're there's a surprisingly large number of them mingling with us. I'll just say that. And that I definitely know from firsthand experience. Obviously, in the area where I live, Mount Shasta, like the fact that there's a city underneath the mountain is just common knowledge among the townspeople. It's not particularly secret around here. People are like, "Oh yeah, Telos," and it's not uncommon that I meet a person locally who claims to have visited them. So, they're very present.
Do you know how many entrances there are to Agatha on Earth on the surface?
I've witnessed at least 5 personally.
Where?
One in this place in East Asia, one in the area of Mount Shasta, and there's a huge underground military base in this area, and that's part of why they're here. Part of why the U.S. military is here because they're trying to access those inner Earth places, but again, they can't do it because their vibration is too low. Um, yeah, it's not physically possible to go there with a low vibration, so they have a natural protection around them. Any sort of evil is just not gonna, they won't be able to physically travel there. And they keep trying, they keep drilling and going deeper and deeper and trying to get there, but they're never going to get there. So, whew.
So it's like a dimensional shield
Yeah.
that's protecting Agatha.
Yeah, basically. Hmm.
So they cannot dig too deep, even though they do have these large underground facilities. And
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
well, this whole, what is it, like a transportational system underneath the ground?
Yeah. For anybody who's new to this subject, as well as Radu's books, there's a local author. She's now passed away, but she wrote a series of books on Telos, Aurelia Louise Jones. She was quite lovely. Her books are really nice. And she describes fairly accurately, as far as I'm concerned, some of the different groups that live underground. There's an Atlantean colony, there's a Lemurian colony. People still have their national heritage represented in these underground places. So Agartha is a wide network, and humans of a lot of different cultural backgrounds are part of it. So there's a lot of diversity down there, and many major cities. Yeah.
But do they like walk reversed? I mean, upside down? I mean, how's this is always, I mean, this is very fascinating. There's a lot of ideas about how that even works, and gravity.
It is funny to think about. I guess the simple thing to say, like, they're walking right side up just as much as people in Australia are walking right side up, like like from whatever your reference point is, you're going to be walking right side up. And it is very funny to think about that. I do think about that sometimes, even now, like when I journey there internally in my meditations, sometimes my logical mind is like, wait, am I upside down? Like, so that's valid.
And that's where flat earthers have a totally different opinion here because everybody's walking the flat plane.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems very solipsistic to say that your right side up has to be the same right side up for everybody.
So, I mean, so this is definitely very interesting that maybe you can't even go there because of your vibration, and everybody on the surface is not able to go there. But do you think some are?
Yeah, some are. Yeah. I mean, if you do the individual work to raise your vibration, if you personally can ascend and move between dimensions and perceptions and such, you're basically free. You can go anywhere anywhere in the universe. I mean, it's just a matter of going there. It's as simple as thinking about it. Yeah. So
yeah, but in the old-fashioned way that you experienced in the other timeline at the Montauk Project. Using that device, that teleportation device, or time travel device, the Montauk chair. I mean, what was the most outrageous or dangerous experience you had there, and that you had to face?
Sure. Yeah, it makes all this. It makes the chair seem very crude when you talk. Yeah.
We've gone to places this time in part three, haven't we, Alandra?
Yeah, I suppose so. And I appreciate that because I do love talking about all this stuff, and it is important for people to know about. In many ways, it's a lot more important than any of the Montauk business. You know, it's a lot more important, spiritually important. So
Suddenly we went off track, and then the whole Montauk thing seemed a little bit like, yeah, as you say,
yeah, well,
primitive.
the tie-in to Montauk is that during this is how we got started on this whole thing. Um, my missions, my Montauk missions would take me to that community where I would directly encounter the Shambala people, and they would display such amazing enlightenment. You know, that's how we got started on this. That started at Montauk. You know, I got wrapped up in that whole milieu because of, you know, because I was sent there through Montauk. So we started there. Um, let's see if anything else comes to mind from the Montauk times that would be good to talk about. I mean,
Like a
I think-
dangerous or really like not a sort of very insecure experience where you, well, maybe you didn't know if you could return or.
yeah, okay. The absolute scariest ones for me would probably be so there was some journeying between parallel timelines and alternate dimensions as I was sort of starting to touch on. And the scariest place that I personally encountered was um, it seemed to be an alternate timeline where the Nazis had won World War II, and they were basically in control of the planet openly. Um, so
But they
that
are
was,
now, aren't they? In some kind of way.
yeah, arguably, yeah, much more in control than it appears for sure. Sadly. Um, And you know, a lot of other secret space program survivors talk about the breakaway colonies where the Nazis are in control. So, I mean, I could think of three or four people just off the top of my head who could talk about that. You know, people who were in the German breakaways. That wasn't so much my experience, but there's a very, very large swath of Nazi civilization currently out in the solar system. So, there's that. And it's true that they also have a base under Antarctica themselves. I have experienced that, but the original place I was going was the Montauk thing, where I would be sent into a timeline, basically, as far as I could discern, like the present day, like the 70s, but in a world where the Nazis were, you know, openly in control of everything. And there was an exchange, you know, this gets it gets very, it's like when you have two mirrors facing each other and it just goes infinitely, you know, either direction, and it gets smaller and smaller. So I had a little bit of that sensation, or, you know, that's probably a mild way to put it. It was much more disorienting. But as I understood it, these Nazis had their own Montauk project, that was interfacing with ours. And there was a tremendous amount of crossover. They were trying to merge these dimensions and these timelines. And that was one of the larger projects that was underlying Montauk, was trying to bring those alternate timeline Nazis into more direct control and influence over our timeline. Um, so that was probably the most scary thing for me. Um, and
So is that the kind of technology they also have at CERN?
Yeah. hmm Yeah. On that timeline, so Montauk is a very important location on the Earth, you know, just spatially, spiritually. So on that alternate timeline, they were also using Montauk. The location of Montauk in Long Island was also being used for their project. So there's something about that place on the Earth which is just ideal for this kind of timeline breaking work, because they were also doing it. Yeah. So to say that briefly.
Like at
Um,
CERN and at Antarctica.
yeah, among other places. But I was saying physically at Montauk too. Like the crossover point between that I would cross over between this timeline and that timeline was physically at Montauk. Like I would travel to that timeline and I wouldn't move spatially. I would just move across timelines. So I'd be in the same spatial location. Um, and that was really trippy. Um, the best description, I haven't found anybody talking. Well, Misha Johnston has talked about this a little bit. You might have her on the show. She's because she can talk about that from personal experience. She's lovely. I've done some spiritual work with her as well. She runs survivor support groups. Anybody watching this who is a survivor, and there are probably a lot of you, might want to check out her website. Starseedawakening.org is her thing. She's the only one that I've personally heard talking about this Nazi timeline, and a few other of my Montauk friends have talked about it. I haven't seen that in writing anywhere. The closest that I've found is a fiction work. Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle is his version where the Nazis won World War II. There's so he was working on a sequel to that novel, and in the sequel, he only wrote like the first chapter of it. But I'm a huge Philip K. Dick fan, by the way, because a lot of what he's writing about is like, I mean, it's the closest thing to my experience that I ever found in writing. And of course, I acknowledge that this is fiction, and and for those who are questioning my grip on reality, and if I can distinguish fiction from fact and all that, I mean, I don't want to give them more ammunition, but but his stories are, a lot of them are very strikingly similar to things I've experienced. In particular, his first chapter of this proposed sequel to The Man in the High Castle, where he's basically describing the dimensional gate between this reality and that reality. So that was something in print that I found that was very much like my experience. Yeah.
So how many realities are there?
I mean, obviously the short answer is infinite realities, but in a practical sense, in terms of like fully articulated alternate timelines that the Montauk Project was connected to, 3 or 4 main ones, basically. Yeah.
So 3 or 4 main ones, a
Yeah.
parallel version of this Earth happening at the same time with a similar timeline, and there
Yeah.
are versions of you there and versions of me there, or not?
I'm kind of fuzzy on that. I mean, logically, the answer seems to be yes, of course. I don't have a lot of personal experience with that, like that I can recall. I don't think I ran into another version of myself or anything like that. Maybe I did. I don't know. But
Well, there are
yeah,
many versions of you already, right?
this is true. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
But you don't believe that we have an alternate person there, or an avatar walking
Um,
around making
well,
different choices than maybe we did.
again, again, I think we do. I think we do. But it's just not something that I can speak to from personal experience in great depth. That's all I mean.
But have you
Yeah.
heard about it from other people?
Of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah, a lot of, especially secret space program survivors, um, it's common for us to have very intense encounters with alternate versions of ourselves and our loved ones. Um, yeah, my friend Arkeem, also a Montauk survivor, who has his own channel, full disclosure now, and I was on his channel a while ago. Um, he talks about this sort of stuff quite a bit. Encountering different versions of things, and people in his life that he recognizes from alternate timelines. He's like, oh, you're in this completely different role on this other timeline. And, I mean, so he would be good to talk about that. I have some experience there. But I guess, I mean, one of the benefits of all the spiritual assistance that I have, personally, is that my mind doesn't get hung up on that stuff as much. Obviously, I'm touching on a million different things that could easily drive a person crazy. Um, um, but I'm very
Well, if you've
fortunate.
never heard about any of this before, and if you haven't watched our channel and other similar channels, I mean, this is like, you can't even, you don't know where to begin. It's like so
Yeah,
difficult to comprehend. But of course,
yeah,
we've talked about basically all of it. So, I mean,
Yeah,
it's not news to me, but it's you've certainly experienced a lot, haven't you?
I have. And just to finish that thought, like I have the good fortune to be in conscious contact with my guides, and they really help me stay level and stay out of these like mind traps and speculation that's not helpful. So of course I can speculate as well as the next person, but I try to stay true to my guidance. There's a path which is laid out for me, and I'm generally very happy to follow it, and it keeps me kind of grounded. Yeah.
So talk about the secret space program because that's something we've heard a lot about, especially in the last, let's say, 10 years or something. But there's a lot of speculation there,
Yeah.
scrutiny, and people are very discerning of
Yeah.
the validity and the truth of whether this is another hoax or steering
It's yeah.
that let's say the growing truth movement in another direction.
Yeah.
And in order to confuse them, there was this whole thing about Corey Good,
Mhm.
and we know that that's something that is separating the camps, right? So, what is
Yes.
your? I mean,
Yes.
you say that you were part of the secret space program,
I
but
was.
so you say it is the truth, or what?
Yes. Absolutely, unconditionally, it is the truth. Obviously I can't vouch for anybody's experience besides my own ultimately, but there's a large community of us. There are dozens of us who have come out now. So, and of course our individual testimonies are going to differ on different things, and of course some of us might be confused about this or that thing or misremembering this or that thing, but the gestalt of it is just a powerful impression that this is very real, like regardless of whether Corey Good himself is truthful, or any particular person is truthful or not. I personally think I haven't seen the debunking stuff on him, and I might check it out at some point. But my impression is that he's saying a lot of true things, and like I don't know what his experience has or hasn't been, but um, it feels like kind of a controlled opposition disclosure thing, like a hangout, as they say, where there's some truth and there's some fiction, and it's very mixed up. And of course, this is part of our challenge at this time, to really hone our sense of discernment and to really know in our hearts if somebody's speaking truth in the moment. This is one of the most important skills we can cultivate at this time. And we have a wide variety of media, people telling all sorts of half-true stories. I mean, most of the disclosure is coming through double agents. It's coming through people who are controlled, and that's just the nature of what's happening. So even if people are compromised, even if they're not telling the truth purely, obviously there's enough truth in it to go on. There's enough truth that we can meaningfully start a disclosure movement.
But it's
Yeah.
certainly this whole field has become very well polluted and it's very confusing.
Yeah,
And
that's
it is
that's the nature.
separating people as well. It's the
Yeah.
Hegelian dialectic being
Yeah.
used here also in the truth movement, and
Yeah.
people fight. There's a lot of infighting, and that
Oh,
we see all the time, whether you believe there were this or that, or yeah, flat Earth, round
yeah.
Earth, two planes, holograms, whatever. I
Yeah.
mean, it
Yeah.
goes into every aspect of this
It
all.
does. Yeah, people are disagreeing very passionately about very small details and very big details. Um, I'd like to quote Rodney King. Can't we all just get along? Like that's that's the most important thing. Like it's fine
That
that we're
would be a dream scenario, wouldn't it? Definitely.
yeah, it's fine that we're not going to agree on all the individual details of everything, and of course, the further you get into cosmology and metaphysics, the more personal it gets to each person, and so there are going to be many different perceptions of what's happening. Um, I think a mature person is able to hold all these contradictions and to hold all these multiple perspectives in a harmony, and take what you like and leave the rest, as the 12-step people say. Um, I mean, that's what we have to do now. So
That's definitely what we have to do, and that's also what we always say here on this
yeah,
channel because we try to present and cover it all, whether it's totally outlandish, or whether it's something more political happening on planet Earth, whatever
yeah,
that is, even. And that's
yeah,
what we're discussing here, right?
yeah, for
And
real.
today is actually election day in America.
It is.
It's the 5th of November, 2024. We're recording this,
Mhm.
and this is like Kamala Harris or Trump. So who's it gonna be,
Mm.
Alandra?
I don't know. We'll find out. Yeah.
Who do you think?
Probably Trump based on the energy, but you never know until it happens.
But you also said, which of course, created quite some controversy on the channel here in the comments section, apparently, that you said that you saw Trump at some of these satanic rituals
I
when you
did.
were a
He's
child,
Yeah,
and he's a
yeah,
part of that. A lot of
yeah.
people will not believe that, Alandra.
I know there's a big investment in emotional investment in Trump helping us, helping the disclosure movement. Um, I'll believe it when I see it, basically. I mean, he's not clean at all. Even just on a normal, if you just observe his actions and his words just as a normal, rational person, I mean, that much should be obvious. Like, you don't even need to have any insider knowledge. You just listen to what he actually says. I mean, it doesn't sound like an enlightened person, to say the least.
So if he does win today, do you think it's going to create some riots or people being very upset, or what's going to happen?
Many people are guaranteed to be very upset no matter what the outcome is. Um, yeah, just remember to be kind to each other, you know. That's the most
A
important
lot of
thing.
people are not kind to each other these days. Also, just regular families and people,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
America, are really upset and going against each other.
Okay. I should say here, this social division that we're experiencing is engineered. This is not natural. It's not actually a clash of beliefs. Like, this is a heavily engineered situation. People are being bombarded with psychotronic weapons, even normal people, not survivors, just your average everyday civilian on the street. They're being bombarded with technology which makes them more combative, which makes them less trusting. All of this stuff, we're under really severe attack. And people are being relentlessly goaded on into these meaningless fights between each other. And to fight over the smallest things, like I, I,
To
I,
fight over a lie, right? A
yeah,
total lie, which is this political game, which is
yeah,
not true at all. It's just if you vote for anything, you vote for the New World Order, don't you?
yeah, yeah, yes, I do believe that. I don't believe there's some voting choice which is going to make us not go into a new world order timeline. Like, all the voting choices are going on to that timeline, including Trump. Like, this is part of a process. It's part of a plan that's been unfolding for generations. Um,
So
and
will it happen? I mean, we already have the New World Order. We're living
yeah,
under New World Order, well, New World Order dictatorship, really, and we've done so
yeah,
for decades, really.
yeah.
But I'm just thinking, will it be as bad as they say with the social credit system and the climate lockdowns and more things that
Yeah.
that that are quite similar to the flu and other things that will happen to us here that they will impose on the population before also 2030?
There will be many attempts. I'm not in the business of predicting the future, um, just to be clear. But there are many attempts going on. But we are also co-creating this reality. No matter how advanced the mind control is, no matter how deep the web of lies gets, like, each of us is a creator of reality. We are each gods and goddesses, and we can remake this world no matter what happens, no matter what sort of controls are attempted. We can remake everything literally from the ground up, from the fabric of reality. Like we are conscious co-creators, and we can make this experience whatever we want it to be ultimately. I mean, obviously the control makes it confusing and it makes it harder, but we still have these innate abilities. Yeah.
But if people believe what the media is telling them and the political system and the monetary system, organized slavery, really working hard every day at a job from 9 to 5 or 8 to whatever, and for very small money. I mean, it's not going to
Yeah.
widen anybody's, perception or make them happier, right? Or make them see all of these things in order to change the perception that could eventually change the timeline.
Yeah. Well, not everybody has to wake up for the timeline to change. Even a very small minority of us. This is actually one of the few areas where I agree with Dr. Stephen Greer. I think he's a double agent. I don't really trust him. But one thing that he says that I do believe, is that you only need about 1% of the population, to wake up to have the entire scenario change. So we don't need the masses of people waking up necessarily. Obviously, that's preferable. But we just need a critical mass of relatively well organized people, and we can totally turn this inside out.
So if you had these psychic abilities, you've talked about this is what you were kind of born and bred to have. You had these psychic abilities. Did you also have the ability to move objects and turn things turn things on with the power of your mind and all of that? Was that something you experienced having on this as Alandra or as Max or
Yeah.
both?
As Max more than as Alandra. Yeah. This is it's an ability again that anybody can cultivate. It's not so much of a paranormal thing as it's been made out to be. Everybody has a little bit of telekinesis naturally. Um, I've never excelled in that area personally, so I don't have a lot of training for it. Even when I was doing it a little bit, it wasn't that impressive. So maybe other survivors can speak to that who had that skill more developed. Um,
So, but if
John,
you had that skill developed and other people have it as well, why can't they do it now? Or can you do it now?
I cannot do that now. No. Um,
Yeah, but how does it change? If you had it before, it must be part of your soul
yeah,
frequency
yeah,
or structure.
yeah.
So if you had it,
So
you remember it, why can't you do it
I
now?
okay. Um, so mind control really heightens people's faculties. It needs to be said. Kathy O'Brien talks about this in a really nice way. And she's very practical about it. Like she talks about visual acuity, for instance. When you're under mind control, that really escalates. Like your higher senses are much more activated when you're under mind control. And this is like part of the reason that the perpetrators do this in the first place, is because it makes people more psychic, it makes people more intuitive, it makes them better soldiers. That's part of the nature of the thing. Like when you don't have access to your own conscious thoughts, you have to use other faculties. You have to tap into other levels of your being in order to get through the experience and in order to live when you don't have access to your own consciously directed thoughts. It's like and Kathy O'Brien gives this example as well. It's like a blind person, develops a much keener sense of hearing, a much keener sense of touch, a much keener sense of spatial relationships, because they're not relying on these all the time. It's a very similar principle with mind control. When you don't have access to your conscious mind, all the other aspects of the mind get very, very heightened. Yeah.
So, but if you had those abilities and they were heightened because of the mind control and because of the programming, isn't it like when you're now deprogramming yourself or you're partially deprogrammed, isn't it also like shutting down an area or being like dumbed down, if you will. That's a more
Yeah,
negative term,
yeah,
from what you already had. I mean, that
it's
ability.
true. Yeah, this is a frustrating thing for survivors, and I know the survivors out there will understand this, because a lot of us can recall having much more powerful abilities than we have presently. This is just universal, and
That's
it's
also why it makes it a little bit harder to believe for people listening to this. Like
yeah,
they were talking about what they could do and what they couldn't do, and all these
yeah,
amazing abilities,
yeah.
and now all they can do is talk.
It's true. It's very disappointing. It's disappointing from our perspective too, not just from the audience perspective. Um, I had another thought somewhere. Um, maybe it'll come back.
Oh,
But yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just want to say for myself, when I was being released from Air Force intelligence and from the cult people, it was around 2003. And again, this is part of the Montauk time wave. It's not accidental that I got free at that time because it was part of this larger process. When I got free in 2003, um, I had very, very intense electroconvulsive therapy used on me. So I was given massive brain damage before I was released. And that is a very obvious physical reason why some of my memories are unclear, and also why some of my abilities are not as sharp as they were. Speaking for myself personally, every survivor is going to have a different story. But for me, the electroshock really messed with things, and that was intentional. It was targeted to obscure my memories, and it was targeted to reduce my abilities. So, the perpetrators were partly successful in those regards. So in my case, there's this very obvious physical reason.
but you've certainly gone in a specific direction, and you're using healing as a tool to help other people.
This is true.
And you've become a healer, and you're
Yeah.
part of also kind of a therapist in a way for
Mhm.
people that were under mind control, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
survivors of
Yeah.
satanic ritual abuse
So,
and all that. So
mhm.
talk about what led you on that path and how you're working with people. What is your job now doing all of that?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that question. So, first, I want to briefly distinguish between psychic level skills and soul level skills. So, my psychic skills have been a little bit compromised, and sometimes they're in and out. I'll say that. I might get to a point where I can perform telekinesis again, and hopefully, maybe I'll do that publicly if I do get that back. Um, there are a lot of like remote viewing is another kind of psychic level skill, right? People can be trained to use their mind in a certain way to produce these results. Um, then there are soul level skills, and those soul level abilities are essentially immune to tampering, like there's no way to interfere with them. I mean, my perpetrators did everything they could to sever my connection to spirit, but they failed because those things are always going to fail. Like no matter how much brain damage, I unfortunately had to go through, or any other physical damage, or any other interference with my psychic level skills, the soul level skills are going to be still always accessible no matter what, because they come directly from source, from the soul level. And yeah, maybe it's probably not the time to go into like a more intricate discussion of that, but I just want to name that because these soul level skills are really what help us ultimately. It's why the survivors made it through, like the people that survived this experience and that are talking about it, we've had to rely on those soul level gifts. That's what really changes a person's destiny, like whether or not you learn to remote view, like probably doesn't change your destiny that much. But if you can tune into those soul level things, that completely changes your fate and your karma and everything. So, it's much more, it's a much bigger thing than just if you're able to use your mind in a certain way, right? Okay, so
And do you think, well, just before you go on, because this is just a side question, but do you know or feel when you've met people before, not necessarily in this version of who they are now and who you are now, but do you feel that there's like a soul connection to different people, or you definitely know that you've met those before?
absolutely. Yeah, there are a few people that I know from Montauk who are in my life currently, who are my friends. And I really value those relationships. There are people that I met under mind control that I've become intimate with as a free person as well. Yeah, I mean, one of my ex-girlfriends was a former handler of mine. Um, and yeah,
Really?
yeah,
A mind control handler.
yeah,
So she became your girlfriend after you were out of that whole thing.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, in order to try to get you back into that system or what?
No, no, she's relatively free. No, it was from a free place, basically. Yeah, and she's starting to come out and do her own interviews as well. So I'm very excited about that. Yeah,
Oh, we'd like to hear
yeah,
more about that and who she
yeah,
is.
yeah. I don't know if she probably is not ready for me to share her name publicly, but she's starting to get more public, so hopefully that continues.
Well, you can let me
Um,
know at some point if that
yeah,
changes.
yeah, sure. It's really up to her. I just want to give her the choice, you know. Um, yeah, I've had a lot of people. I mean, I have like one of my best friends right now is somebody that I met in an underground base who I was being trafficked with. And I didn't realize that until I'd already known him for a while, but um, we kind of established that, and it was like, oh yeah, and it kind of made a lot of things fall into place. He's not public, so I'm not going to name him, but yeah, I have a lot
In this life,
in this life, yes,
you met as when you were both children, you
yes,
met at that time
yes,
and remembered the same situation.
yes,
That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Or, well, it is.
yeah, it's tremendously validating. Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's miraculous, really. You know, it's one of those synchronicities. You know, Goddess is always in charge. Like it often appears that other people are in charge, but you know, Creator decides everything. Creator is always in control, no matter what.
Yeah, but then
So,
my question always is, why does Creator or God allow these dreadful things, horrific things to happen to people here?
um, I don't have a universal answer for that. I have my own personal answer, which is uh, I came here partly to expose these things, so I had to have the experience in order to do that. Um,
Yeah, but why
and
doesn't even why do these things even happen in order for somebody to be able to come out and expose it?
because duality is part of conscious evolution. Good and evil are part of conscious evolution. Yeah, that's universal.
So you need the yin, the yang, the black, the white, the evil, the goodness, and all that in order to experience life or what in this
Yeah,
three-dimensional
basically.
realm.
Yeah, so evil as we experience it arises sort of in the lower part of the third dimension, and it's a very much part of our third dimensional experience, and it continues throughout the evolutionary process from about the third to the lower sixth dimension density. Part of this is from the raw material, the Law of One books. I those are very accurate and so lovely. I love them. But basically, and so for people who are curious just about the universal nature of good and evil, that's one of the best sources that I know about. Those books are available for free online. Um, Love and Light Research Foundation, LL Research Foundation. They're out of Kentucky, I believe, in the U.S. So for anybody who wants to really tackle the good and evil question, that's a wonderful source.
So
Um,
it's also a matter of good and evil when we die, right, and go to that place, that
yeah,
tunnel of light.
yeah,
And maybe we don't want to go to that thing, that soul trap, that death trap.
Yeah.
Archon created, orchestrated trap to
Yeah.
enslave us and put us back on another timeline here, right?
Well, rebirth is not a trap. Rebirth is a normal, natural thing. Um, but of course, getting slapped back into a mind control situation is a hideous manipulation. Um, but
So
yeah,
do you think that reincarnation and that karma wheel cycle circle is a good thing and an organically organized, whatever, structured thing and not
yeah,
created by the Archons? Because we have really
yeah,
discussed that quite a lot here. Because
yeah.
why are we being put back on a timeline,
So
a wiped memory?
yeah, um, good and evil is part of evolution. Duality is part of evolution. Basically, all the archons do is exaggerate that duality. They make it more dense, they make it more full of illusions. They make it a more confusing journey. But at the end of the day, good and evil are natural things. It's a natural process.
But
And
can't we
yeah,
get out of that? Isn't that just a matrix construct
yes,
within the
yes.
matrix?
We
I mean,
we
why don't you just when you leave this body, why don't you just go back to your Scorpio constellation? What was that name of that star people?
Antares. Yeah,
Ontario? Yeah. Why don't you
Antares.
do that? Or I can go back to wherever maybe I
Sure,
got.
yeah. I can and I might. I haven't decided yet, but
Yeah, but
um
if they are luring you, and if you're seeing somebody you really loved, or grandmother, or who I maybe not in your case, I don't know what that. I
yeah,
mean, that whole family history is
yeah.
kind of tricky
Well,
as it is, isn't right? But I
well,
mean, I'm just they often do that, presenting God or
mm,
Jesus, Allah, whatever, in front of
yeah,
the people that believe this.
yeah. Those illusions are relatively simple to dispel. Anybody can do it. Just keep your heart open and stay tuned to what's really true for you. That applies after death as much as during life. And your heart will guide you to the right places. If something is not wholesome, your heart will know about it. So just trust your heart.
But will you be trapped and not be able to decide, I'm not going to go through this again. This is the end. I've had enough. Goodbye.
um, this is such a personal thing that I really can't give an answer that's going to be true for everyone. Yeah.
Because maybe, if you really understand, if this also is a hijack, just above the third dimensional level, maybe in
So
the fourth dimension or something.
okay, while we're at it, since you seem very keen on this, um, our current Earth system does not have a really good soul net that catches souls and forces them to reincarnate in certain situations. Like that's not really the case on our planet right now. Like that was the case in Orion, and I definitely experienced that. And for anybody curious about that, The Prism of Lyra by Lissa Royal is a really good book describing that. Back in Orion, there was a soul net. There was basically you were forced to reincarnate in certain ways, and it was extremely diabolical. That does exist on Earth, but it's very spotty. They don't have complete control. There's always a way through and a way around. There are many gaps in the net, as it were, many holes in the net.
So it's
Um,
about consciousness control or mind control on another level. I mean, just when you die, then they will lure you into that in order for you to feel ashamed of what you did, to go back into another body and make it your decision, so to speak. Or,
yeah, that happens. Yeah, people get manipulated through shame in the Bardo realm. It does happen. I mean, it's arguable whether that's the true Bardo realm or simply the path to get there. Um, and of course, this will be very abstract for those of us who have not had near-death experiences. Um, for those of us who have, you know what I'm talking about. But um, yeah, I mean, there are those kinds of manipulations. But again, it just comes back to the heart. Stay true to your heart, stay in your honesty, and it'll take you to the right places.
right. So, well, just in our remaining moments,
Yeah.
Alandra, and I know
Yeah.
there's so much more we did because this was we went everywhere. So there's a lot we didn't get to cover even in this one, but we did a lot. Do talk about what we didn't get to now about your
Yeah.
work as a
Yes, my work.
healer and as a deprogrammer in a way for people, huh?
Yeah. So, yes, that's why I started talking about the soul level thing, because a lot of the skills that I use every day in my work now are soul level skills. Like, that's my main skill set is using these soul level skills to help people, um, which, really differentiates my work from a lot of other, coaching and therapy and whatnot, because I'm bringing in that very spirit infused perspective to help people. And I think you really need that to get out of mind control, like a conventional logic based approach can be helpful. I mean, there are honest therapists out there who do help a lot with recovery, but ultimately you've got to call on the soul level skills to really free yourself from mind control. So that's what I do. That's what I help people with. Yeah, and I work with other survivors, and I also work with anybody who's interested in spiritual development. So, maybe a third of my clients are other survivors, and the rest are just interested in whatever aspect of spiritual development they're interested in. Yeah, some of the work is,
So they can also get like a clairvoyance what or healing or
yeah,
what do you do
I,
in I mean those
I, so, yeah, there's some of that. These days I tend to sort of downplay that. My emphasis is more on coaching and less on reading things. Because I think the most meaningful change for people is obviously self-directed change, right? If I'm just like giving you a bunch of random information, it's not necessarily that empowering for a person. It can be at certain moments, but most of the time, what we need, what I need and what I try to offer, what we need is guidance. We need like to be helped through a process of our own self-realization. So I have done readings and I do tarot readings and I have some clairvoyance about things. It's more like claircognizance in my case. But I use that pretty sparingly, and my emphasis is more on connecting on the heart level, building emotional trust, kind of therapy type things, building a rapport. Because I just feel like that's so important for helping people get free, in this world where it's just so hard to trust anyone or anything. Um, building that trust is life-saving. So that's been my emphasis lately. I do still do occasional readings and answer questions, but yeah, it's not what I'm interested in at this moment as much. I'm really interested in more long-term coaching work. Yeah, because it just seems like it helps people more. Yeah,
so is it both men and women
yeah, hmm yeah.
and
All people from all walks of life.
and they can meet
hmm
you face to face, but then they would probably have to go to Mount Shasta or fly you in somewhere, but
Well,
they can also get it
yeah,
online, I suppose.
yeah. The vast majority of my clients are online all over the world. So yeah, it's primarily Zoom sessions that I'm doing. Yeah.
Hmm.
hmm
That's great. And how does it and does it also help you in your own development and understanding what you went through?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's pretty routine that I'll be working with another survivor and this bit of context will emerge, that I never had. And it really helps me kind of, integrate my own experiences. So it definitely helps me as well. Yeah.
Great. And if people want to contact you for a session or something like that, how can they do so?
Easiest way is email. It's Alandra@riseup.net is the email. Um, yeah.
Rise up at Alandra
Riseup.net.
at riseup.net.
Yeah, that's the easiest way. And I try to answer most of my emails. I do get a lot of them lately, so please don't take it personally if I don't get to it. But I do my best to answer them, and yeah, that's probably the best way. Yeah, and then I'm working on a new website. I have several websites for different things that I do. The main one for spiritual work is OntarianJourneys.com. So Ontarians like my higher dimensional guides, Antarean journeys, journeys.com. That's my spiritual work site. Yeah, and I'm in the process of updating these a little bit, but yeah, those are the basic contact things.
Interesting. And of course, you are a musician and a poet as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I sort of assume that most people who are interested in all this metaphysical stuff are not as interested in that stuff, but yes, I also do write poems on the spot. I set up with a portable typewriter, and I improvise poetry for people. I do this at the Mount Shasta Farmers Market in the summertime. Still kind of figuring out a winter spot here. And I do events, I do like parties and stuff like that, corporate events. That was how I made my living when I lived in New York. That was mostly what I did. So which is its own interesting journey as well. Yeah, I'll actually be headed to New York next month for a couple of poetry gigs. So that'll be fun. I'm still doing that. And that's Poetry Upon Request, and poetryuponrequest.com is the website. Yeah. And then for music, I have my stuff is on Spotify and I have a Bandcamp. And if you just put my name in, Alandra Markman, if you put it into Spotify or you put it into Bandcamp, you'll find some of my music. Yeah.
That's great and very interesting, and also a big part of you, of course.
Yeah.
So, just before we wrap up, is there anything you want to end with and say to the audience or something?
I'd like to encourage all the survivors out there to believe yourselves. Like, yes, it is that crazy. Yes, it actually happened. I mean, just the shock and the dissociation is like the majority of the work to heal is just getting through that. And then once you believe yourself, so much becomes possible. Like other forms of support open up inside and outside yourself. And the more of us that do the healing work, the more of us that come out and talk on shows like this, I think the better it is for everybody. So just want to say there's plenty of room at the table. And it's really important that we as survivors, come out and speak out. Yeah.
Well, definitely. And it's been so fascinating and interesting to have these 3 amazing sessions with you. And this is a good place to wrap up part 3. And I'm sure we'll meet again, hopefully in person one day, but also maybe on the show at some later point. But it's been great meeting you and getting to know you a bit, Alandra. Thank you for all those stories, and thank you for being on Age of Truth TV.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah. Yeah, and it would be fun to meet in person sometime. That would be really fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good evening then. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alandra. Talk to you soon.
Welcome, Lucas. Bye.
Thank you so much to Alandra Markman, and thanks to all of you for watching Age of Truth TV. You can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell for notifications. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website, ageoftruth.tv as well. Please also subscribe to our alternative channels on BitChute and Brighteon. Your support is greatly needed and very appreciated. And on behalf of the Age of Truth TV team, we thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.